Okay. So I think I'm going to get started. It's 2 minutes past 2. I don't want to hold you up all afternoon. I'm sure you're all busy and you've got other things that you've got as well as listening to me. So we'll get cracking. There are some people that have joined, so welcome. There's a few that I can see that have joined anonymously, so welcome to you all. Thank you very much for coming. Obviously, people may well join throughout the session, which is fine, or maybe they're struggling with their technology or trying to find the link or whatever, which is usually the case when we do webinars. So I'm sure they'll pick up the thread. We are recording the webinar as well. But thanks very much for coming to this webinar this afternoon, guiding your team through redundancies, a guide for HR managers and business owners. Time-wise, you're probably looking at around half an hour. Obviously, there's going to be plenty of time for questions at the end, so there's no real limit on that, but kind of approximately. It really depends how quickly I talk, and that's usually driven by how much caffeine I've had so far today. But yeah, we'll see how we go. Okay, so just a little bit of housekeeping while we're waiting for everyone else. If you can ensure that your microphones are switched off, if that's okay, I'd say have your microphones and your camera switched off just throughout the presentation. It's when we've got multiple people on a webinar, as you can imagine, if everyone's got their cameras off, it gets very noisy. There's a lot of background noise. There's car alarms going off and dogs barking, and everyone else can hear it, and it becomes a bit messy. So it's far better as an experience for everybody if microphones are off, and obviously because of the recording as well. Do feel free to type questions into the chat box. Ask questions whenever you like. If there are questions that you want, that you kind of burning to ask throughout, or if there's something you want me to repeat or something I've said that doesn't make sense, just drop a question into the chat. Just bear in mind we will be doing full Q&A at the end as well, but if it can't wait to the end, then do feel free. Because it's a relatively small group, I'm happy. If there was sort of 100 people on, I'd be saying, right, we need to wait for the end for questions, because otherwise we'll never get through the material. But yeah, questions at the end or throughout is absolutely fine. So in terms of what we're going to cover, so you'll have all had the invite, so you know roughly, hopefully, what this afternoon is all about. But what I want to really cover this afternoon is firstly just assessing, I suppose, the current state of the market, for want of a better expression. So the effect of the recent budget on the redundancy situation, and the sort of the market as it looks at the moment in terms of redundancies, tools for job seeking support, managing survivor guilt, so managing individuals maybe within your organizations that are not at risk of redundancy or having to remain, building workforce resilience, communicating with empathy, and then obviously we've got Q&A at the end of the session. Before I get started on the material, for those of you that haven't been on one of these webinars before, a little bit about myself, not too much. The last thing I want to do is talk about myself all afternoon, but as hopefully you've picked up, my name is Laurence. I'm the Client Services Director for an organisation called Outplacement First. We provide support to teams and individuals going through change, redeployment and career transition. We've been in the game for over 20 years. We're one of the oldest, most established firms in the sort of relatively niche world of outplacement. Now, those of you that are on from the sort of HR community, hopefully you've never had to use our services before, and I say that in the nicest possible way, and hopefully you won't have to use our services. You know, redundancies are not a particularly pleasant thing to have to manage, and it's not something you really wake up every day hoping that you're going to have to manage, but nevertheless, let's be realistic, at some point you may well have to, and I'm guessing that's probably why you've chosen to attend today. So we'll get started a little bit on the sort of current landscape, and I think it's always useful just to kind of assess the playing field when we're talking about a situation or a topic like redundancies. The economic landscape still quite unstable when it comes to the job market. Obviously, the latest budget, the effects of which have obviously not been felt yet, but it's all about kind of perception, and businesses are going to be facing increased financial pressure. The national insurance rise is obviously going to affect businesses because there's more money to pay out, going to potentially affect wages, it's going to potentially affect prices of services, and it's forecast to potentially lead to a rise in redundancies. There has been a rise in redundancies anyway. They've risen to 2.8 per 1,000 employees. That's a figure as of June this year. But when you have a situation like the budget announcement, companies are obviously assessing their staffing needs and assessing their staffing strategies for next year. Undoubtedly, that's going to lead to cuts in certain areas, or a drive to be more efficient in certain areas, or maybe outsourcing staff to other places in certain areas as a way of cutting costs to mitigate against the hike in national insurance. So potentially we are looking at a rise in redundancies across the board, and obviously being prepared for that is going to be sort of paramount. That obviously has an impact on HR, on the sort of human resources world. Now, what does that really mean for HR? Well, if you're an HR manager, if you work within HR in any capacity, and then you suddenly have a redundancy or a change situation thrust upon you, usually it means an increase in workload, because you have to manage the redundancy process for the staff affected directly, and obviously the wider team as well. Communicating those changes, it means there's increased pressure to keep remaining employees engaged amid sort of rumours and talk around job security, and a kind of decrease in morale. Greater need for compliance and legal understanding to avoid the risks in the redundancy process. For a lot of people that I speak to in the HR world, and it varies massively from one organisation to another, redundancies are often thrust upon HR managers. 78% of HR managers have been involved in managing redundancies, but a lot of them don't feel fully prepared for the process. Certainly that first time round, it's often thrust upon them and they've never had to deal with it before, or it's last minute. So that kind of increase in pressure is definitely paramount. Managing redundancies within your team then. So what are the sort of impacts do we think that redundancies are going to have on staff that fall under your remit? What does it kind of look like? Well, we're seeing potentially an increase in stress and anxiety across the board. That's in the HR community that are managing redundancies. That's in obviously staff that are potentially going to be at risk or affected, staff that are not going to be at risk or affected, those that remain in teams and in departments still have the same anxiety and risk. If you see teammates, colleagues, members of staff that you've worked with or interacted with or are just aware of potentially being in a pool of those affected by redundancy, you do tend to feel stressed about it. It does tend to increase anxiety. It tends to increase a kind of distrust in the organisation and in management. It affects employee engagement levels massively, because you want to be seen and you want to be working for an organisation that wants all of its staff and that's doing well. It's just a natural way that employees kind of think. You get this sense of staff wanting to jump before they are pushed. Okay, well, there's obviously changes going on. I need to look for something else, sometimes unnecessarily. So there is this kind of general impact on staff even when there's just a rumour that an organisation is thinking about redundancies or is going through some sort of negative change, like an increase in costs. So something just kind of worth bearing in mind. There is a silver lining. I know that's an overused expression, but a well-managed redundancy process can still be of benefit for your organisation. 50% faster reemployment for departing employees with structured outplacement support. If a process, any process, even a negative process like redundancy, is seen by employees to be well managed, then that can lead to higher morale and engagement levels with remaining staff. So those that leave feel better about leaving. Those that remain feel better about remaining if there's been good communication and a well-managed process throughout. Obviously, the opposite is true as well. If a redundancy situation is poorly managed, if communication is poor, if people are not informed, if there's kind of rumours and people talking in corners and not communicating with the whole kind of workforce, that obviously leads to a negative impression of the organisation, both from those that are affected and those that are unaffected. So a well-managed redundancy process is so important. Enhanced reputation as a compassionate, responsible employer. So many of the people that we look after as an organisation, I mean, end users of outplacement support, it's surprising how many of them actually still feel very positive about the organisation that's made them redundant, because their process has been well managed and because they've been given support to help them through the process. And obviously the opposite is true as well. Those that are most negative, they're not necessarily negative about the fact they're being made redundant. they tend to be negative about the fact that their process was poorly managed. Their communication was poor, they weren't given sufficient notice, the consultation meetings were rushed or unprofessional, the remaining staff weren't communicated to in a kind of clear way, they weren't given proper reasoning, and the support was maybe rushed or just given to them at the last minute, that kind of thing. So well-managed redundancy process, absolutely key. Communication, I've mentioned that word a few times, as a classic keyword when it comes to something like this, but clear and transparent communication during redundancy processes can really reduce survivor guilt and improve morale. So it's paramount to those that are leaving and remaining. Stress levels among remaining staff drop by 25% when communication is handled effectively. It's something that's negative, it's something that's unpleasant sometimes to communicate. No one wants to have to communicate to somebody else that their role is at risk of redundancy. However, not communicating things clearly makes the situation 10 times worse. So the reasons for layoffs have to be addressed and shared honestly, with empathy, of course, and empathetic language to validate the feelings of those affected is really, really important. But also honesty, employees really benefit from that. They really will buy into and respect an organization that is honest with them about why changes are taking place. Staff should be regularly updated with relevant information. It's not just an announcement at the start and then nothing, and then suddenly you're in consultation. There should be regular updates so that employees feel part of the process, not separate from it. And you would tend to always buy into something, even if it's something negative, like a redundancy situation or maybe something else negative in life. You tend to buy into that if you feel that you are part of the process. Whereas if you feel a process is going on separate from you and you're not being kept with all the relevant pictures, if you're being kept in the dark from it, you'll tend to only feel resentment towards that process. So some practical tips for empathetic communication. So be direct but kind. So avoid sugarcoating. Employees are not stupid, they know what's going on. Be honest with them about the reasons, but also show empathy. Acknowledge that a situation is both difficult for them and for remaining staff, and follow up with each employee individually to address lingering concerns. And that's really key, is to not let those concerns linger. So staff should be part of the process, as I mentioned on the last slide. Support for remaining staff. So I mentioned a couple of times about this idea of sort of survivor guilt. When people are thinking about redundancy, it's often the people that are affected, that are in the pool, those roles are at risk, that are talked about. But so I think I've got someone that's got their microphone just off there. If you wouldn't mind just muting yourselves, if that's okay, because I'm getting a little bit of background noise. That's great. So survivor guilt. So those who remain often experience survivor guilt, wondering why have they stayed, why have others left? Are they going to be next to go? Yeah, I'm safe for now, but what happens in a couple of months' time when there's a rethink? I've been told for now that my role is safe, but how can it be? Because this whole team has gone and the colleagues have gone that I've worked with for years. 33% of employees who remain after layoffs report feeling survivor guilt. They struggle with the emotional impact of keeping their jobs where others were let to go, and they feel anxious. And sometimes it can feel worse. Well, my two colleagues in that team, they were made redundant and they've gone on to another role and they've got another job now and they're really happy in that role. Whereas I'm still stuck here in this organization that's making cuts and that's struggling, and I don't know what's going to happen next. And, is there going to be enough money in the pot for me to get support and get what I'm entitled to? And sometimes you can feel more anxious. So it is something that's really worth thinking about and worth addressing. Acknowledge the impact and provide space for employees to share their feelings. So those that are not at risk of redundancy should not be excluded from the process. Again, they should be part of the process. They should have regular updates. They should be provided with generic updates from those people that have left and been successful in achieving roles elsewhere. Regularly reassure them about their value to the organization and their role moving forward. Again, they shouldn't be just left in the dark about ongoing changes. Consider peer support sessions, team check-ins. You can run workshops or one-to-one programs for individuals that are not at risk of redundancy, but are working for an organization that is going through change, much in the same way as you can provide support for those people who are having to leave and look for something else. You can also provide support for individuals that are remaining in roles as well. In terms of supporting those individuals that are being made redundant, this is obviously a big area, and this is what we do as an organisation. When organisations support redundant staff, it really does help alleviate survivor syndrome among remaining employees, and obviously it's of great value to those people that are leaving. Now, there's a whole load of practical support that, as an organisation, you can do to support people that are having to, whose roles are at risk or that are being made redundant. And I'm going to just go over a couple of areas. But obviously, if it's something you want to explore in more detail, do reach out to me or to my organisation directly. If it's something you're thinking about potentially investing in or outsourcing for your employees, it's certainly an area that we can help with. Some of the key areas: networking, using LinkedIn to find new roles, CV and covering letter. You could do that kind of one-to-one or in a workshop scenario. Interview advice and interview practice, and obviously emotional support. Usually when someone finds out they're being made redundant, certainly if they've not had to look for a role for a while, in terms of sort of practical tools, it tends to be CV, LinkedIn, cover letters, interviews tend to be the kind of the mainstays, the cornerstones of any job search. And those tend to be the areas that people look for support in. Without being provided with support, people just go onto the internet and start doing searches, and there's some great material on the internet, there's some terrible material, and everything kind of in between, so it's worth just kind of bearing in mind. I would be stressing the importance of networking. 70% of jobs are found through networking, both in person and online. There is this kind of mystique around it that networking is something that's only for managing directors and CEOs, and kind of schmoozing on the golf course and speaking to other directors. And this idea of networking is much broader than that. It's basically speaking to people that you know. So friends, family, staff, colleagues, former colleagues, clients, suppliers, etc. You can join groups, both professionally. There are usually industry events, and staff should be encouraged to attend those. Having a strong network to build your job search on top of is so kind of key. It's something people that can do right at the beginning of the process. Staff should follow up with their contacts, keeping regular contact and communication. Encourage staff, if they've not got a LinkedIn profile already, encourage them to set up a LinkedIn profile. It's really a great entry point into any job search because it covers so many of the sort of fundamental areas. 75% of people who recently changed jobs use LinkedIn to help them. So at a practical level, as a job search tool, it's really valuable. But it's so much more than just that. Yes, it's a social media tool, but it's not just social media, it's online networking as well. Recruiters use LinkedIn to find candidates. Candidates use LinkedIn to find recruiters, to find roles, to research companies, to expand their network, to keep in touch with their existing network. You can obviously join groups on LinkedIn as a marketing tool to market yourself. It tends to kind of sit at the center of so much job search activity that if you're thinking about developing your network, building and developing a LinkedIn profile that you can use moving forward in conjunction with some of those other areas that I've mentioned will be fundamental. And it tends to be an area that a lot of employees will ask about. And so many of the people that we engage with that come to us for support, they say, look, can someone review my CV and what's LinkedIn? Can I have some support with LinkedIn? Or I've got a LinkedIn profile, but I'm not getting the most from it. I don't really know how to use it. I don't like social media, so I don't want to use it. Those kind of questions. So a few tips in terms of leveraging that. Connecting with industry professionals and potential employers, joining relevant groups. I mentioned about networking groups. Obviously, LinkedIn, you can search for a professional networking group for pretty much any role or any function. So that's something people can definitely do. Sharing relevant content with posts can really help increase visibility. I would be encouraging staff to spend 5 to 10 minutes a day on LinkedIn engaging with relevant content, and obviously utilising the job search function for roles that are exclusive to LinkedIn. And so a lot of employers will only use LinkedIn to advertise jobs, whereas the online job boards like Indeed and sites like that, which can be great, they tend to be quite recruiter dominated. You'll see a lot more roles on LinkedIn direct from companies, and it'll often divert you to a company website. So a few ways there to kind of leverage LinkedIn for people that might be asking. as well as the sort of practical support and those kind of practical job search support areas that I've mentioned, it's important to think about building emotional resilience. Going through redundancy is stressful, it's difficult, it's hard for people, it's mentally upsetting. So trying to build a resilience and maintaining a positive mindset can be crucial. So providing a protective buffer kind of improves problem solving abilities and coping mechanisms, helps you maintain confidence, keeps you motivated. I would be encouraging some kind of non-work areas to build emotional resilience. Some of the basic stuff like mindfulness and meditation, for those people that are interested in that, I can really recommend the Headspace app, actually, because I use that most days. Physical activity. Now, people don't have to go out and start running marathons every day, but small amounts of regular activity, especially for me, if it involves getting outside into the fresh air and into nature, is such a great way of boosting confidence. It's great for mood. It's great for sort of mental calmness. It's great for sort of getting clarity. If you're going through something stressful, you go for a walk in the woods. It's amazing how better you feel when you get back. Now, I'm not suggesting for a moment these are the answer to all your problems, but it's just a way of helping. Having a good, healthy, balanced diet, avoiding excessive caffeine, sugar, and alcohol, staying connected with friends and family. So there are support groups and online forums, and setting small, manageable goals and really celebrating the small victories. And that can be when it comes to a job search or elsewhere in life. You want to grab the small victories and hold on to them, however small. If they represent a step forward, then they're super important. So there's a few ways there that we can help our staff, and you can help your staff that are going through what's potentially a difficult time build emotional resilience. And as well, I would say for those of you that are managing a redundancy process, that are managing redundancies, maybe it's something you've done lots of times, maybe it's the first time you've done it, take care of yourselves as well. Let's not pretend it's an easy process or something that you really want to have to manage. None of us want to work really for an organization that's making lots of redundancies. Seek support from work, family, friends. Focus on the things that you can control. Talk about how you feel. Don't bottle things up. And obviously, as I mentioned, celebrate the wins. Celebrate those small victories. Super important. Okay. If outsourcing some redundancy support is something that you're considering, so you've got an upcoming change project, your organization is considering redundancies, and you're thinking about getting some support and potentially outsourcing support to an organization like ours because it's not something you have the capacity in-house to deal with. A few things just to consider when you're looking for outplacement support. Most outplacement providers, including ourselves, will offer career coaching, support with job search strategy, CV reviews, mock interviews, personalized plans. We offer those both on a one-to-one basis or as a group. That can really be a time saver for HR, and it obviously boosts team morale. Like outplacement for departing employees, it shows that those employees work for an organization that cares, and it really will help reduce survivor guilt. So, that's something that you're interested in. If you're considering outplacement support for employees, obviously just either drop me a message directly or kind of respond to the email address that was on the invite. Be more than happy to talk through some options. Key takeaway, I've probably done that in record time. No, we're about right, actually. A few key sort of takeaways. So be prepared, be well prepared for potential redundancies. Bear in mind what I've talked about when it comes to open and honest, direct, but empathetic communication. Do remember about survivor guilt. So many organizations will only focus on the individuals that are in a certain pool, those whose roles are at risk, and forget about everyone else in the organization that's potentially affected as well. Provide ongoing support for redundant staff and support for surviving staff as well. And remember to support yourselves as well throughout the process. Okay, so that's probably enough of me talking. I know we've had a few people join throughout, so a couple of questions, and I'm more than happy just to drop your questions in the chat as we kind of move forward. So a quick question to start with: what we say is the best way to announce redundancies to the team? And I think that the answer is, in some ways, is in the question. Redundancies at the beginning of the process should be announced to everybody. if you announce things that directly just to individuals and keep everybody else in the dark, that's not great for the individual because they're isolated. It's not great for everybody else either because it creates this kind of rumor situation. If an organization at the beginning, potentially before you know who's going to be affected, it should be announced clearly and honestly to everybody potentially involved in the organization that there is a redundancy process ongoing. Then separately, individual one-to-one chats need to happen with those affected. But there needs to be this careful balance between, yes, speaking to people individually, but sharing with everybody that there's a process that's going on that's potentially going to lead to redundancies. So tips for employees that have stayed that are feeling resentment. So I mean, a few things. Obviously, those people that have stayed can feel disillusioned with the organization that they're working for. They can still feel anxious. They can feel anxious about their own roles. A couple of things to address. So if they're feeling resentful, they're feeling sorry for the people that have left, I would certainly be sharing with those remaining employees how well the people that have left are doing. That kind of alleviates some of the guilt that these individuals that have left are not struggling. They've secured other roles, they're interviewing, they're getting great support from another organization. And then also you need to re-emphasize the value that those employees have for the organization. It's not so much you've stayed because you're better than them, but it's your role and you are valuable for these reasons. And it can be a great way of increasing. You think back to how you generally get employees to engage with their roles. So going back to your SMART objectives, as an example, and we kind of maybe looking at those again, involvement in projects, increased responsibility in certain areas. So it's a kind of a two-parted process really in terms of alleviating guilt that they may feel to those that are leaving, but also re-emphasizing the importance of the organization. Just reading one of the next question here. How do you ensure people are accountable for their words and actions during this period? It can bring out some bad behaviors in people. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think it's a difficult one because obviously emotions are high often during a difficult period. Emotions can be high during a redundancy period. I think people do need to be accountable for their words and for their actions. And I think this is where you really have to have this balance between open communication with the group and then taking things offline. I think if people behave badly, certainly in front of other people, not rising to someone's bad behavior, so not responding to them in front of the group, but then taking them aside separately, there's great value in looking someone in the eye and saying, look, I know that this is a heightened and an emotional period. However, the way you reacted, the way you spoke to so-and-so, the way you addressed that group wasn't right, and that's not okay. And this is what we need to do to fix it. I think people will often act in a certain way to get a reaction, and they're looking for a reaction usually to impress other people within a group. Any advice on staff that feel like they've taken on other people's work? Yeah, taking on other people's work. Now, this can be, it depends really whether they feel negatively or positive, or negative or positive about taking on other people's work. If it's a question really around survivor guilt, I've taken on this person's work and they've been made redundant. Again, it comes back to the same actions I mentioned earlier around addressing survivor guilt, is that you have to address honestly, and be honest, like, as an organization, we are looking for efficiencies and we are looking to cut costs. And that's why we've gone through a redundancy process. You are remaining because you are of a certain value to the organization. It does mean increased responsibility and having to take on the work of others in certain instances because you are a trusted member of staff and you can take that on. I suppose it really depends on the context there, but how should I approach my boss about the budget for outsourcing if I don't have the time? I guess if it depends if this is a question, if you're thinking about budget for outsourcing for support for yourself, or for a group. So a couple of things. What I would probably do first of all is reach out and get some pricing from one or several providers that outplacement providers. Um, get them to put a proposal together for you, with different tiers of so you've got some options. If you're going to your boss about a budget, you want to usually give them a few options. A lot of organizations that we support will have a few tiers of support. So kind of a long service support where people that have worked for the organization a long time get a little bit more support, or people that are maybe in a slightly more senior role and thus have maybe a more complicated job search process. Get a certain tier. I would get all your ducks in a row first. I would, if you're looking at outsourcing, I would go to a couple of providers. All providers should provide you with a proposal and a breakdown of services and programs and costs completely free of charge. You can then assess them, and you've got something concrete that you can go to your boss and say, look, this is what this organization can offer. Not sure what the budget is, but there's 3 options here from sort of top to bottom, depending on length of service and seniority. If there's any other questions. Just making sure I've not missed anything. I don't think I have. What I would say, and just to come back on one of the questions here, if you're anything like me, because I do this, literally as soon as I finish any meeting with anybody and I click to end or leave Teams or whatever, I think of 100 questions. So that's absolutely fine. If any of you have got questions, do feel free just to come to me directly after we've finished the session. That's absolutely fine. If you've got any questions at all, do just reach out to me directly. I'm more than happy to have a completely free chat with anybody, both either about managing a redundancy process or about potential services that we can offer. So do feel free to reach out. But no, sort of thank you for attending. Hopefully you found it useful. We do run these webinars on a sort of semi-regular basis. We usually do one every 2 or 3 months. So the next one will probably be early 2025. I don't know where this year's gone, but there you go. So just keep an eye on LinkedIn. Everything will be on there. If you're on our mailing list as well, you'll get notified in that way, or both. So I hope to see you all again. But for now, thank you all very much for attending, and I wish you a good rest of your Thursday.